collapse. And they think the inflation's a problem. And the response to that inflation causing a credit collapse, global credit collapse, is what you're starting to see sovereign bonds starting to price in. And that's just starting, but that is bound to get a lot worse. And so as we fling backwards and forwards and kind of flush people from side to side, you have a lot of pain coming to the global economy.
And I love, sorry to interrupt, but I love that word, counterparty risk. Okay. So my experience in the great financial crisis was exactly that. You know, everybody scrambles to find what their exposure to Bear Stearns was. These are interbank. Basically exposures that, you know, you never assume that one of these big institutions can go down. And then all of a sudden, hey, what is my real exposure to Bear? What's my real exposure to Lehman? Well, we're seeing that right now. What's my real exposure to Credit Suisse? Counterparty risk is what brings down the system, because when one fails, it causes a domino effect, right? You think you have insurance with this insurance provider, and all of a sudden you don't, and then you're naked on your position. That's why in the great financial crisis, they rescued AIG, because if they didn't rescue AIG, Goldman Sachs was down. Okay, so isn't it funny that Hank Paulson, who used to work at Goldman Sachs, organized the rescue of AIG?
But
right?
the problem with doing that, and if you just follow that math, is all you're doing is actually increasing the debt. You're socializing the losses. You're increasing the debt, and you're moving it up the stack.
Correct.
And where we are on the stack, there's nowhere higher for the debt to go.
Mm-hmm.
So once you're into sovereign debt, that is government debt, there's nowhere higher for that to go. You turn into a spot where at some point you're gonna have to do yield curve control and massive printing into inflation to be able to, which makes the problem worse. Both sides, it's just an ugly situation.
Both of you have talked extensively on various podcasts about something's going to break and then that's going to trigger the pivot. So why haven't things broken yet?
I think they're in the process right now, let's be honest. And you saw Yellen yesterday say, she's concerned about the liquidity in the treasury market.
All of a sudden, she did an about face.
But they tend to suck and blow a lot, right? Like one guy is a bear, another guy's a dove, but here's what we have to remember. It's not going to be the corporations are going to be trickled down. It's going to be because it'll start at the sovereign level, and the risk will flow downhill. The UK gilt crisis has had an immediate impact on U.S. collateralized loan obligations, CLOs. So that's junk debt is getting crushed in the United States because the pension plans in the UK needed to sell something. So they're selling collateralized loan obligations into the U.S. market, causing contagion into the U.S. because of the gilt problem. So all of these intertwined things, what you need to remember when it comes back, Bitcoin, which we all love, has no counterparty risk. That's why it's such a beautiful instrument. You haven't purchased insurance from anybody. It is insurance, in my opinion, but it's not like it's outstanding with any company that can fail. So having spent my career in the credit markets, I see things unraveling. It's slowly, but suddenly. Well, right now, it's not zombie companies we need to worry about, Nat. It's zombie banks, like a big bank like Credit Suisse or Deutsche Bank, that kicks one last thing uphill. Imagine if Deutsche Bank fails, it has to be nationalized by Germany, and all of a sudden Germany isn't the sugar daddy of the EU anymore.
Yep.
I don't know. Not a zero probability, not a 100% certain outcome, but certainly not a 0% chance outcome as well. So you have to plan against these risks all the time.
Yeah, and I think if you just carry that forward, and if you understand Bitcoin doesn't have counterparty risk, and that's what makes it special, you have most people pricing what they think is safety from the system that is providing uncertainty, and that creates more and more risk as they're leaning into that system, driving more and more risk into the portfolio by doing so. And there's this, and they're pricing Bitcoin from that system, whereas Bitcoin is a system that's actually repricing this entire system. All of the credit, all of this entire system is going to be repriced into Bitcoin over time. But people, because they're used to pricing Bitcoin through the system.
Right.
That's what I love about Jeff's argument.
Yeah.
Right? You can't measure. Isn't that what you say? You can't measure a system.
Can't measure a system from a system.
From the faulty system.
But
right?
you're so used to doing it because that system is a reference code for everything else. That risk-free rate that we think is risk-free and it's not risk-free is the reference rate for housing, which we think of the system. It's for every way of the emergent thing we call society, the emergent complex thing we call society and the way of life is priced from that system that's breaking down.
So now, can I add something when you said zombie company? So the definition of a zombie company is any corporation that can only cover, its interest expense one time or less, okay? Meaning its EBITDA or its pre-tax cash flow only meets interest obligations one time. And that's about a triple C rated company. Conversely, a triple A rated company can cover its interest expense 10 times. Mm-hmm. So you can see when you can cover your interest expense 10 times, well, that's a pretty good quality credit. But if you're at 1 times, you're playing with fire.
Yeah.
Guess what the USA is? 1 times. So if the USA were rated as a corporation, triple C, that's not a good thing.
No.
Now, they can print money, but you got to compare apples to apples at some point.
But we're worse than that. It's the reference rate for all other currencies.
Oh.
So when that happened, when the only way out of the problem of the reference rate for all other currencies is to drive high rate of inflation for a long time in the US, what do you think happens to the rest of the world?
Exactly. And trickle down.
Yeah. And so what you're seeing is an unwind. And now that could take some time and a whole bunch of different events. I would say in the world we're moving to, expect the unexpected.
Let's talk a little bit about the idea of printing into high inflation, because Jay Powell has tried to be so hawkish, saying that he wants to get the target rate above core inflation, which is now only going up, right? So that's going to be very, very difficult when you have so much debt in the system. But if and when the pivot does happen and they do print, I don't envision a scenario where all of a sudden people are piling back into the tech stocks, the dream stocks, so to speak, and the S&P hits 6,000. We seem to be in a new cycle. Lynn Alden talked about this in her last newsletter of how we went from growth to value. Do you see that as well? Like when the pivot happens, what does that look like and where does the printing go?
In my opinion, so let's first talk about Jay Powell thinks he can be Volcker. Mm-hmm. And he can't be Volcker because when I said the debt just moved up the stack, Volcker had 30% debt to GDP, right? And so when you have 130% debt to GDP, which is now, and you're trying to drive interest rates up or having to drive interest rates down, as the economy collapses, as unemployment moves up, out of that unemployment moving up, what do those people do that now don't have jobs? They lean on the state. But there's no way to pay those people more money. So all those people that are they're not just going to be homeless tomorrow without services and so, because that's the other option. Mm-hmm. Everybody just gets cut off, and you protect and you reset the credit, and that credit spiral collapses the entire system. So they have to come in with massive easing. And that's actually why that's why typically central banks always get co-opted by the state. There is no independence in time because society wouldn't allow the independence. Mm-hmm. And so Treasury comes in and says, or you vote, people vote to remove the independence because they're hurting so bad that they'll vote for anything for short-term fix, which causes more pain. And so that's kind of where we are in the cycle. And unfortunately, that is coming with whether it's yield curve control, whether it's helicopter money, whether it's fiscal stimulus. You can guarantee that at some point it's going to get really bad. I think he's going to hold the line for some time, and it's going to get worse in other countries first. But as they're making the dollar stronger and selling their assets and making the dollar stronger, that means that their labor rates are going down in relation to the U.S. U.S. is the only buyer of the world. As everything else sells off, it means U.S. exports are not competitive. as a result, and it kind of breaks it further. And then they're going to come in with all of the stimulus.
And let's be clear though, they cannot not print. Okay, they're saying they're going to try QT, but the error term right now in the debt spiral that they are in right now is to print money. There's no other way out. So they're going to pretend they're not going to print, but I'm afraid the math is they have to print. The question is, when do they pivot from their inflation fighting, even targeting inflation from, they currently have a 2% annualized inflation and they're targeting Fed funds to go to 4.5 to 5%. It's only at 3.25 Fed funds, and everything is breaking already.
Yeah.
So, by the way, that rate, like if you bringing down inflation to that rate, wouldn't be enough to bring the debt under control.
No, that is solved.
Yeah,
that is the grade 11 math. Okay, like I'm afraid you guys painted yourself into this corner. So,
okay, but what does it look like when the pivot happens and the printing starts again? Because I think a lot of people are wondering how will the assets really be affected by that?
So I would just say that's actually why pricing that whole thing from outside the system, whether the debt collapses into debt collapse and Bitcoin becomes a safety asset because of that, or when it prints and Bitcoin is a beneficiary of that, I just look at what is the thing outside the system that accrues the most value in this system and transitions us to something more stable and long term and long term. Where do I want to spend my time building where the future is going? So, but in that example, if you said in that example, houses would probably do well again. They wouldn't do well like Bitcoin, but people will try to deploy money into anything they think is safe that they can get a return on from rents going up or something like that. So housing could do well again. Oil will do well. Yeah. Energy will do. Commodities will do well. Anything scarce and it will do well. Again, same concept. Abundance of money creates scarcity everywhere else.
Yes.
And so look for things that are scarce that abundance and money has to race into. But the most scarce is Bitcoin.
And if I could add in the thing, did you notice that both outcomes that Jeff mentioned, because we don't know, both lead to Bitcoin, right? All paths lead to Bitcoin. So don't overthink it. If the Fed doesn't pivot, global depression, own Bitcoin. If the Fed does pivot quickly, more debasing of the currency, own Bitcoin. And I like it.
And inside that entire structure, you can imagine if you were all in on risk, if you were all in on something that was based on the Fed pivot, and then that didn't happen, you're wiped out.
Right.
And the other way.
Right.
And so, and expect this to be volatile, moving back and forth. And what people think is, oh, I'm winning. And then they're going to get wiped out because they're going to lever into that win.
Yeah.
And they're going to get wiped out the other side. And then they're going to go back and the other people are going to get wiped out. It's going to be very, expect the unexpected.
And it's amplified everywhere else in the world. That's the sad part of it, right?
Yeah.
The implications in other countries, the less privileged countries.
Well, it's really sad to see what's happened with the energy crisis here in Europe. I was talking to my Uber driver here in the Netherlands. His energy bills went up 5 times.
Yeah.
He's paying 5 times more per month, and he's frustrated with the politicians. He feels like he has no say. And it really is interesting how it's turning into sort of, the plebs and the average people versus the elites. And that's really what I think this Bitcoin fight is, right?
And let's just move back to 99% of people on the planet don't understand Bitcoin. 99%, that means 99% of the people on the planet are living in this system, and because of potentially status quo bias or biasing an expert view or somebody they think is smarter, they're reinforcing that system and making it stronger. And as they do it, they think there is a solve by a new person who can blame other
A
people.
political savior hero.
Political savior. And it's not, that is impossible to solve. This is a math problem, as Greg says over and over. And it's impossible to solve from the system. But because society believes it's possible to solve from a system, they will vote for more people in that system, and they will divide society. And unfortunately, that's the thing that I just hate seeing, that when you say Uber driver, or you say, we turn against one another when a system is this corrupt. We can feel it, and we don't know what to do,
Right.
and we think somebody else can solve our problem.
I saw a graph where the 1%, the percentage ownership in the world of assets by the 1% versus the 99%.
Mm-hmm.
We are getting to a point where the 1% of the world owns more assets than the other 99%.
Yeah.
You have that in your book.
I had it in my book.
Yeah, well, then now I saw
and it's
the
just gotten
updated-
worse.
Yeah.
And it's gotten worse because you could predict it was
Right.
would get worse out of the system. I think an important part, just out of the conference, a number of people asked this, and this was an insight for them that they hadn't contemplated. Because when you look at Bitcoin, people want to carry all the baggage from the existing system,
Mm-hmm.
all their biases, into Bitcoin, and the system operates in reverse. So an example of why inflation works is wages are sticky. And so inflation for most of society is wage deflation. And so people get paid less in real terms. And I'll give you an example. When I was a lifeguard at 16 years old, I made $20 an hour as a lifeguard at 16 years old.
No way.
Good lifeguard.
Yeah, it was. But $20 an hour working in the summers as a lifeguard pool instructor, and my kids make $16 an hour now. That was in 1986 or something like that.
That's crazy.
And so that same $20 is like $60, $65 an hour now. And so when you have kids today kind of not being able to pay their bills and figure out, okay, I have to live at home till I'm 45.
Right.
And that's why.
Yeah.
And we don't understand the consequences of making those decisions and destroying currency and destroying value for those people. And it has massive consequences that just build up and build up and build up. So, but the exact same thing, because wages are sticky, works in reverse too. And so if you had a currency that was stable, that allowed deflation to happen from technology, wages being sticky is a transfer of wealth back to the middle class and poor. It just works in a reverse.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to get too dark here, but I know that I myself and probably people in my audience, they're just a little bit nervous about everything that's escalating with the war in Ukraine and the threat of possibly nuclear weapons being used. You both have children. I mean, do you worry about any of that? And how close are we? Like, are we on the brink of something potentially happening with both the energy crisis, currency wars that are ongoing, and really we're on the verge of economic collapse, it seems?
I wrote my book to try to avoid that. I tried to bring that into light. And in the book, there's a chapter called Us versus Them. And that chapter, when I wrote the book, a lot of people talked about the book and said, oh, that wouldn't happen, right? And you can see that happening. You can see a prediction out of all of this that it does happen and it will happen. And war is a result of trying to reset an economic system. That's typically what the end of long debt cycles do, because you have to make the problem. You have to convince your population to go to war that it's not their fault, it's those other people's fault. And we vote for people who will do that because it's easier to put a face on that problem and say it's their fault rather than ours. We want to believe that. So yes, the world is becoming more and more unstable. And I think you have to, we talked about it before taping, even if there's a nuclear event that doesn't cascade into something worse, and it can be contained, think about what that would do to the psyche of the nations. Think about what that would do to every city emptying, trying to find safety, and every supermarket emptying. And if you think COVID was bad and people turn against each other to try to grab the last piece of the toilet paper, think about that on steroids and be prepared now, just in case. And not that it's going to happen, but the probability is increasing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what I would say is, by understanding what you would do, you will have fire insurance It's in understanding what you would do in case of a fire. How would you get out of your house?
Yeah.
You should probably do that the same.
Right.
And I hate spending time thinking about these things, but to understand, and then I want to understand the worst case. I want to understand the probabilities increasing of where the world's going, and then build the future as fast as I can to build the positive, hopeful future.
Right. The parallel system out.
I could just add, look, I couldn't say it any better than Jeff, but this is the most nervous I've been since the great financial crisis, when I sat in a risk chair and honestly saw the financial world collapsing. The same smoldering of the financial plumbing is existing. So on the one hand, you have the potential for nuclear war, nuclear collapse. On the other hand, we have real risks for financial collapse, both of which we hope don't happen. Let's be clear. But the probabilities, i.e. the risks, are increasing. You need to protect yourself against that.
I mean, it's crazy the headlines that we see on a daily basis, from, the gas pipeline sabotage to, I don't know if you saw last week, the OPEC, the manipulation potentially surrounding whether something's going to happen ahead of the midterms so that the price of oil isn't too impacted to potentially allow for a certain party to remain in power. I mean, it's just so much manipulation.
Expect the unexpected. This entire system is more and more fragile, and that fragility is in the entire system. And as it's hitting that end of days, could it still go on for some time? Yes, but could it solve itself for a small time in a certain window? A whole bunch of different options. Yes, but only by making the system more fragile.
So when I worked on the trading desk, one of our lines was risk happens fast. Okay. Risk happens fast. I'm going to warn you. Risk is happening faster than it ever has right now. So risk is actually happening faster because of all the previous risks that have been kicked up to the highest level. Makes risk happen faster. The world's a riskier place, I'm afraid, because of the system we have lived in that continually socialized losses and pushed the responsibility to the highest level.
Can you guys talk for a second about this idea of, when the pandemic hit, we crashed, we printed all of this money just to come back down from that bubble already? I mean, the S&P 500 is about 100 points lower than the high before the pandemic printing began.
I didn't know that stat.
Yeah. I mean, what was it all for?
Well,
only to make the billionaires richer?
No, because the billionaires still have exposure. That being said, some of them are great traders. Most of them probably still have the same exposure. I'm going to let Jeff answer this, but you asked the question, perhaps rhetorically. I can't explain it. I absolutely can't explain it. It was a short-term solution. They printed $9 trillion globally.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden they're turning off all the taps and pretending they weren't the cause of this problem.
And some of the Fed officials sold near the top.
Well, that's a different story.
They don't know, though. That's actually just a system reinforcing a system. They don't know. So remember what people said at that time. It's not going to create inflation. No problem. We got this under control. Inflation is going to be transitory.
Modern monetary theorists.
And they've never sat in a risk chair. They've never built a business. They're making up models that are useless in the real world, completely useless in the real world, trying to understand human action, what people do with their model that makes no sense in the real world.
And then they get the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I can't say it any other way, but this is absolute clown world central, where they go around patting each other on the back. Great job, Ben. Great job. You were the original helicopter Ben. You made this policy, and now we're giving you the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this, but there's a guy named Cuppy who's a great follow, a hedge fund guy. I know who he is, friend of Mark Moss's. All right. I don't want to dox him too badly. He said, Bernanke should be in prison. I'm not saying that. I am saying that. I will vouch for the same thing. This is criminal behavior he said, Bernanke should be in prison. I'm not saying that. I am saying that. I will vouch for the same thing. This is criminal behavior that is disgraceful for my children.
But you just carry that on. In my book, I talked about the 2 years of Bernanke quotes that said, leading up to 2008, that said, no problem. There's never been subprime well contained. There's never been a reduction in housing prices. The economy is strong. over and over and over as he carried on policies and then he gets a Nobel Prize
Right.
for bailing out the system that he created.
Well, Senator Cynthia Lummis on my podcast recently said that when she was in the House, Ben Bernanke was asked at a public hearing, at what point is our debt unsustainable? And his quote was, I don't know, but we're not there yet. And then she's heard subsequent Fed chairs say that. And it's like, at what point does the music stop playing? I mean, and that, I guess, kind of begs the question. I'm curious your thoughts. We seem to have kicked the can down the road and during times when people thought, no, this is the last one. This is the last QE. Yeah. We're not going to be able to do it anymore. What's the scenario in which we do muddle through this?
So today, if the entire world is going to stay on the U.S. reserve currency, then what that means is U.S. could continue. Essentially, the rest of the world is financing the U.S. and the U.S. essentially giving vendor financing to the U.S. and the U.S. prints money to trade in printed money, and that is a negative externality around the world. And if that keeps going, and other countries are going to trade their hard assets for paper that's going to be devalued over time, forever,
like oil.
So I'm going to trade the things that are valuable in my country, and I'm going to trade my labor in my other country for paper that's worth a depreciating value for eternity. Then this could go on for a long time because it means the rest of the world's pain is the U.S.'s gain. But I wouldn't bet on that. I wouldn't bet on the rest of the world.
Risk will happen faster, but let's do the math for the whole world. Everyone says, how long can it go for the U.S.? Okay, I agree it can go more for the U.S., but it's the periphery nations that will fall down once. Because again, if you take the world as one system, the total debt of the world is 400 trillion versus GDP, which is 100 trillion. If you look at the whole world, all right, it's very simple. There will be catastrophes because of that math of the whole world. Can the USA still do it? Most likely. They will be the last. They're the best looking horse at the glue factory, but that's all they are. The best looking horse at the glue factory.
But what ends up happening is now, so the 40s were like this, but the U.S. was the only superpower, and they were in China's position kind of as a manufacturer of the world in that at that time. Today, they're very different. If you added today, information travels faster. Right? So learning happens faster. So people are more aware of a problem like this. There's more superpowers, and there's 9 nuclear nations today and growing, which is different than the 40s. So you could, in 40s, and they could impose financial repression on their citizens, and their citizens didn't have a way out. Today, you can't, with Bitcoin, you can't impose financial repression. People have a way out of the system. And so just that alone, as people understand that, wait, I could play in the system and I could make it stronger, or I could just choose to not have financial repression, and I could choose a different system. That's a big deal. And then as other nations understand, wait, I can attract those people. And those people have money and economy, and we can build a new economy. It creates a game theory that other nations are going to accept this. So again, this is just a long way of saying that on both events, Bitcoin it transitions this system into something new.
On one of the panels that we listened to at Bitcoin Amsterdam, they were talking about the idea of the central bank that does adopt Bitcoin will have an advantage. So in terms of the G7 countries, which one do you think will likely, embrace Bitcoin? Because it would give a country like the United States a huge advantage.
So I actually suspect the United States will embrace this earlier, although maybe not as publicly as a central bank doing it, but through the free market, because it's already happening in Texas and in Florida, and so in Wyoming, it's already happening, and there's tons of business building onto the mining business works. There's a lot of countries in Kenya, the amount of mining activity that's moving into there to chase cheap energy. So this is happening around the world, but we've talked about, could it be Canada? We'd like it to be Canada, but I suspect it isn't.
But
Canada.
we don't have a Jason Lowry.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a shout out for my buddy Jason Lowry,
He's
who works for
fantastic,
the Space Force, U.S. Space Force. Probably the only guy that is in the same league as Michael Saylor that I've met in the intelligence in terms of brain intelligence, right? I've been lucky enough to become friendly with him. Met him in Boston, and he's confided in me some of the things that he's working on, which is amazing. Like, you're lucky. The United States is a great country, all right? The reason it's not going to happen in Canada is because we just don't have the freedom anymore that the USA has. At least you guys have a constitution where freedom of speech is still, the First Amendment, right? And that's what you need, and that's Bitcoin. And the two things, in my opinion, dovetail nicely. But that being said, the USA is the bastion of capitalism still in the world. They know the risk. There's enough smart people.
UK, with what the UK is going through right now, UK could move to this faster just because of what they're going through.
Fair. I would agree with that. But it won't. Unfortunately, it won't be Canada because we just don't have the global heft. What we do have are people like Jeff that are trying to educate. Luckily, we meet great people at meetups like this in Amsterdam that take little pieces home. Mm-hmm. Once it happens, though, it'll be a game of, it'll be game theory. Just look at what's happening in Central America with El Salvador. Mm-hmm. Those numbers are so exciting. If El Salvador had equity, they don't, but if they did, I'd be a huge buyer of the equity of El Salvador. But strangely enough, Jeff and I talked in the past about buying the bonds of El Salvador. Effectively, the equity of El Salvador, we would have loved to have bought those bonds and know that we would get 100 cents on the dollar back. But then Bukele came in and scooped up a bunch of bonds. Brilliant financial risk management in the face of a world. They had their GDP grow at 10% on a $28 billion economy. That's not bad. That's $2.8 billion for the good guys. What do you hear in the press? Oh, they lost $50 million on their Bitcoin position. Excuse me. You lost $50 million, but you just put $2.8 billion on your top line revenues.
Well, and it's unrealized, right? I mean, they haven't sold their Bitcoin. They're holding on to it like that. That was the plan.
Still an opportunity cost. But that being said, Nat, you got to understand, right? It's an order of magnitude higher.
For sure.
That's, actually you said it the other day. Is it 2 orders or 1 order? It doesn't matter. The point is you're dealing with $2.8 billion versus $50 million. And what does the New York Times and Krugman report on?
And CNBC also,
Really disgraceful.
Their bet isn't paying off. Failed experiment.
Reporting.
Yeah.
Start telling the truth, okay? So people in Central America are going to adopt it. And if we're not smart in Canada, you know what my advice is? Learn Spanish.
Well, but it does speak to that idea of, companies that are adopting Bitcoin as well, institutions. They are sitting on losses right now, including MicroStrategy, right, that are unrealized. But that goes to speak to the importance of the fair accounting change that just happened. Can you share for people that maybe aren't as familiar, how big of a deal is this for Bitcoin?
What happened in the past is you had to write down as a loss your holding on Bitcoin. And you never got to write it up. You only could write it down, okay? If in a case of a company like MicroStrategy, where Michael Saylor says he's going to hold it forever, it's actually irrelevant because you're never going to crystallize your loss unless you sell it. But for new companies that have to report to shareholders that they're putting this risky, in their terms, risky asset on the books, what if your quarter is destroyed because you have to mark down the holding of a Bitcoin, which is a long-term asset marked to short-term? Well, let's be honest. The banks are exactly the opposite of that. The banks never mark down their holdings unless there's a default on the loans. If it hasn't defaulted, they keep it at 100 cents on the dollar. So I think it's fairer, more fair accounting. I think it'll make it easier for other companies to come in.
Yeah, Michael Saylor could buy Bitcoin because he owned enough.
That's correct. He owned the board.
He owned the board.
So he
could drive the control of that because he had control of the public company. In most cases, that type of rule would prevent a CEO from making that decision because they would be out if Bitcoin went down. That next quarter, they're gone.
They flush their quarter.
They flush their quarter, and it's an unrealized loss, and it makes no difference to shareholders. But if the accounting says you have to write it down, you have to write it down.
So it'll make it easier, definitely easier.
You could expect a whole bunch more adoption by companies out of that rule because it makes it easier to adopt it.
Right.
Well, to start to wrap up, I want to talk a little bit more about banks because they have such a cozy relationship with the government. We just saw last week Kanye West and his company basically being canceled by JP Morgan Chase. You experienced something similar in Canada with frozen, accounts because people donated to the trucking protests. I mean, how powerful are these institutions, and is this censorship a great advertisement for Bitcoin?
So yes, I don't know if people know it as well yet. But people are waking up to it. When you centralize power to any centralized organization and you build your life on that centralized organization, you're subject to a rule change that is imposed on you. And that rule change could be anything. You saw it with PayPal. You're seeing it with this. And so that centralization carries massive risks that we don't know. Same thing as building your entire business on Google, and they change an algorithm, and or they say your voice no longer matters.
Yeah.
What do you do? And so that because that centralization, we don't see the risk building, and that we don't see that risk, and then that control changes. Society is duped into something that then all of a sudden, all of the risk is sitting on a castle built on the sand that just collapses, quicksand. And so that's what's happening today. And you have to expect that this existing system has to drive more coercion and control. It has to remove individual rights and freedoms to survive. And so you could expect more and more of that as we cascade down this. You can expect, because the first, it's Kanye, it's okay. It's the truckers, it's okay. And that just moves up the stack, and then all of a sudden it's you.
Yeah.
And when it's you feel, how did that happen?
Yeah, it's just crazy because basically they're picking and choosing. JP Morgan Chase kept the bank account of Jeffrey Epstein after he was convicted of trafficking.
I didn't know that.
But yet, you have someone who built $1 billion company and he has unconventional, controversial views. They shut it off. And then you see the hypocrisy also. Federal Reserve allows the bank, Mellon Bank, to have to custody Bitcoin, but Caitlin Long was fighting for it and not allowed. It's like they're picking and choosing winners and losers, and that's not capitalism at all.
Yeah. Well, if I could add, just because Jeff and I went through the thing with the Canadian truckers, when I was in high school in the 80s, there was this thing called the seal hunt in Canada. You remember, and you're too young, but all the students would wear a pin that showed a seal on it, a baby seal, beautiful little animal, white coat. And there's an entire population in Newfoundland, Canada, that relied on the seal hunt to feed their families, but they made fur coats out of it. And it was a controversial thing. The point I'm trying to make here is, imagine if it was all those people that supported the stopped the seal hunt where they froze their bank accounts rather than Canadian truckers. Okay. As Jeff and I say, your view of it depends on which side you fell on. Oh yeah, freeze the accounts of the Canadian truckers because I don't like them honking in Ottawa. But if you ever did it with a seal hunt, of which I wanted to stop,
Black Lives Matter or something, or
other. So as soon as Jeff said, he said, as soon as it happens to you, then you will realize. As long as it's happening to other people, it's fine. So, be careful, people, because this is the censorship that is very dangerous, and you have to nip it in the bud.
Well, I want to leave on a note of hope, because one of my favorite things about this space and just Bitcoin in general is how much hope it's given me and how it's introduced me to people who I think are the smartest, the most inspiring, and truly the most positive in terms of wanting the world to become a better place and fighting for it. Like you've mentioned this in your tweets before so many times, like this idea of fighting for the world that you envision, that you want to see, rather than, bickering amongst ourselves about the problems in the current system. Like, let's build the new one that we want to see, that reinforces the positive values of collaboration and prosperity and abundance. So What's maybe your takeaway message? We have so much chaos going on, but Bitcoin does provide us with this hope.
Yeah, that is the takeaway. What I'd say is if 99% of the world doesn't see that, meet them where they are so they can see it. Because the more people that just walk across the bridge and start to understand, make the bridge bigger for everyone else. And what that actually is, what's inspiring about that is we all make a difference. We have no idea how that difference impacts other people, and they build on top of our ideas, impacts somebody else who impacts somebody else. But we all make such a profound difference. And so if you're yelling at an existing system, you're actually making that system stronger. Everything you're doing in that system is stronger. And if there's a new system that is actually can heal the world, bring hope, truth, abundance to the world, wouldn't you want that? And wouldn't you want to spend more time there? And it's easy. It's as easy as making a choice and then spending time in that system.
Yeah.
So I agree. So it's just a great community. A shout out to the young kids that I've learned so much from. Like a Dylan LeClaire, like you, Natalie. I often say, if I'm the smartest guy in a room, we better find another room. And so let's make sure that we continue to meet young people, help them be the future leaders. We need more voices like yours. I just met at this trip Amanda Cavallari. Just a wonderful person that I said to her when we were walking to this. I go, I feel like I've known you my whole life, and yet we literally met each other 2 days ago, right? And so I don't know what attracts these people with the same moral code and everything. But it's not Wall Street, I promise you that. Having spent my life on Wall Street, 99% of Wall Street are takers, okay? The flip side is at least 85% of the Bitcoin community are givers, and I'd rather be part of the giving community.
Yeah.
I've come to meet both of you guys who I consider close friends right now, right? And but I'm not doing it because I want to be close friends. Like, I love being close friends with you guys. I'm doing it because I have 3 kids that really are in a bad spot if we don't fight for, the future.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, it's the holidays are coming up, the season of giving. And I just really think today, the most American thing that you could do is find someone you disagree with and have a real conversation and try to make some peace, because there's too much craziness going on, and at least Bitcoin is something that can bring us together, I think.
100%. We meet people. I met Nigel Farage today. I would never have met the man. Love him or hate him, I never would have had the chance to meet him if I wasn't part of the Bitcoin community, right? So, yeah.
Well, I love you guys. Thank you so much for taking the time. Any final thoughts?
No, thanks for having us again.
100%.
It's so good to,
Amsterdam is beautiful.
Yeah.
Keep up the great work that Natalie's doing. Young kids out there, invest in the future by meeting us on common ground to say, we might not be right, but we're just trying to do the right thing. So do well by doing good. It's a great way to live your life.
You know what, though? I'd actually just say your story on you coming into Bitcoin from the press and seeing an opportunity to do something that you love, that connected with your values. It's inspiring to watch you rise and be so inspiring for a whole bunch of other people. And it was just a choice you made to move to a world of hope and where the world was going. But actually inside that choice, what you see is what we think is safe, the old job being safe.
Yeah.
Which is actually creating the most pain for people, and they're stuck and they don't want to make the choice. And that choice provides incredible value. And it's just a frame of reference.
Right.
And so watching what's happened with your career and everything else out of this,
I appreciate that.
And we're proud of you, right? Because it's not easy to take that risk. No, but I'm saying, okay, Leah Halpern.
Everybody's turning off now.
Well, no, but here's what I just want, then you got to edit this back in. Leah Halpern, who introduced me on stage at Bitcoin Amsterdam, just a charming young lady. I happen to, it's not the right thing for a guy to ask, but how old are you? Not because I have a son who's actually a year older than her, and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm.
Why aren't you doing this, son?
But I'm so lucky to have friends that are like my son's age, right? And that being said, I have lots of my son's friends who I'd like to think are friends of mine as well. But this is new friends from the Bitcoin community, all working in the same direction. there's a friend in the back here, Jack, that honest to God, he's going to help change the world. And this is what I really am excited about.
No, it's so fascinating how many different backgrounds, we all come from. And I always said that I think I was searching for Bitcoin. I didn't know it. I knew the values and the questions that I had, but I didn't know I was searching for Bitcoin. And then Bitcoin sort of found me. It found all of us. So thank you guys.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.